not lettered in ancient Greek. And if I'm talking with Hebrew, oh my goodness, what a mess in there. Because the original ancient Hebrew is not the same as modern Hebrew. And you've got things going on in there that even ancient Hebrew researchers will tell you, watch out. It's not the same. That would be like saying that the people of the original nation of Israel are living in Israel right now when they did an actual... that would be like saying that the people of the original nation of Israel are living in Israel right now. It's a double record.
Okay. Here we are. Amazing. So...
Okay.
I finally got it figured out to live stream.
I deal with this on an ongoing. I did a seminar one time, and someone said that I was anti-Semitic, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm anti-Semitic because I read out of a law dictionary that gave the history of a nation that was out of the covenant with God when they were literally conquered in basically 587 BCE." When God said, "I have enough of you. You no longer are going to represent me, and it's going to be a spiritual New Jerusalem above, not a physical Jerusalem." Those people still believe that Israel somehow is spiritual when they're the most warring, vile, evil source of nonsense you could ever see, even in the news right now, because they're the first ones who vaxxed all their people. Okay. These are warmongering evil people behind these nations, and so they're part of the world of basically we're called the UN, which is involving what we call the G20, which is the Gentile 20 nations. But of course, people that don't understand what I'm talking about will go, "Oh, you're prejudiced. You're hate mongering, so I can't talk to you anymore. I can't say anything because you can shut me down because now you're going to go down something that's not factual." So the nation of Israel that we're talking about originally, the covenant nation of Israel that led to the bloodline that led to Jesus Christ, has nothing to do with the Israelites that are inside Israel we say today. They're a democracy, not a theocracy, so they have nothing to do with God. They're a warmongering group of vigilantes, as are the rest of the belligerent nations out there, who have no covenant with God. And therefore, their whole schematic is based on taking you away from spirituality and keeping you in confusion. So there's nothing that is of a relationship that we would have gone back and said, "Oh, is the nation of Israel Semitic?" So when they went into basically DNA testing in Israel, they found that there was probably less than 7% of the population even had Semitic blood.
And Semitic blood
would be the original covenant people, which we'd refer to as Hebrews, the descendants of Abraham, which led to the 12 tribes of Israel. Through his son Isaac, who had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau led to the Arabs. Basically, Jacob led to what we would call the 12 tribes of Israel. And you'd be hard-pressed to be able to have a conversation with someone in Israel right now and say, "What tribe are you from?" And they could not tell you because they don't know. So therefore, no one passed down that knowledge to them. So the odds are their bloodline has been contaminated. I'm saying contaminated, but it has been hybridized, so to speak, with other nations that would have been based on the three sons that would have happened out of the Noah's Ark account that dealt with Japheth, which was the firstborn. Then you would have dealt with basically the bloodline of Sem, which was known as Shem, and then Ham, which basically ran all the other nations outside that. But the white Germanic were out of the Japhetic, the bloodline of the Hebrews, and the Arabs would have came out of Sem's bloodline, and then Ham would have led to all the others. So there's most of this research is still well established. And it's unfortunate that what people are doing is they're mixing into the confusion of institutionalized learning, mixed into just the reality, what you can find by fact.
Well, I think you're blowing anyone's mind that is seeing you for the first time. So thank you for sharing this uncommon perspective of not just the alphabet or the alpha that has been bet on until this point, but also I do want to mention we're going to be doing a few more of these meetings where we're gathering together so that we can all put forward the best that we have come into contact with, because what I believe is that truth is resonant. And so if we can put truth onto the table, then truth will not conflict within the same space. So the best thing for us to do, instead of each trying to be interviewing one person or one man or woman at a time, it's an opportunity for us to come together and question things, challenge things, share an alternative perspective without judgment, because it's safe in order to do so. That's what these communities are an opportunity for us to do. So I sincerely appreciate, Dan, your sharing your expertise. I just really want to say that part of the reason we're doing it in a group context is so that we can actually create community.
Right.
And start rebuilding some of these deeper connections, because the reality is, Dan, and I'd love to just bring this in and then let you get back to the track that you were on, but we've been taught for years that we have to connect the dots, right? But what we never considered is the fact that we are the lighthouses, which are the equivalent of the dots on the map. And when we think about the fact that within that, we are the ones that actually contain the information, we used to turn to one another to get our information. And now we've been sourced with smart technology in order to look into our hand or on our watch or somewhere outside of ourselves in order to get the answer. And so it became about the interconnect or the internet. But we have dropped and lost the connection. And if we don't know who someone is, we're not connected to them in some way, we care less than if we actually were connected to the one that we were hearing the story of. And I feel like that is a really huge piece to bring into the storyline of the tale that has been, and then to say we are also now scripting a new one together.
Right. The key thing that happens, I know that we're dealing with English translations, so that becomes an issue because we're not dealing with the original language, and so we're taking a very, very confused language and then trying to find a way to match letters. And when we were dealing with that, even that subject matter of Job, which was controversial, upset someone with the relationship to Job, it's the matching up that happened there because we're talking in English. So everything we're doing in the Bible is English. It doesn't matter whether or not someone's going to say that the name Job came from came from a Hebrew origin. That's true, but we're now taking it into letters that, and also a language that has vowels that did not have vowels even in the Hebrew language. So all their hieroglyphs were absent of vowels. So the only way you would know how to enunciate something in Hebrew is if you were there. You would have had to have someone pass on the language. That's very, very similar to the tribal nations that have inhabited many areas of the world. Or the earth. I'm going to use the earth. I don't like using the word world because we're now into commerce. So the earth basically had many native peoples that were living off the land. So one unique one was the 12 tribes of Israel, because they were living off the land when they left Egyptian bondage. And they were literally living in the wilderness, which wilderness has the word wild in it. So they were in the wild, okay, trying to function. So they fed off of many things that were in the wild. Their water source, in fact, even some of the things that they received when they were in the wilderness, one of them being quail, which would have been a wild bird, that flew into them in massive amounts to give them a meat source when they were complaining to Moses that they were not receiving any meat. So a huge swarm of basically quail came into them. Uniquely, quail is most nutritious meat out of all the family that we would call fowl. I don't like the word. It sounds almost like a double word on that because of what we relate to fowl meaning something bad, and at the same time it can mean something of a bird nature. It's not to say the bird is foul, but the spelling of it, F-O-W-L, those fowl came in massive amounts because it was such a quantity and an easy meal because it's just enough you need, because you don't need to eat a huge portion of meat. So he gave them these little birds that gave them the most nutritional value that you would ever come from something in the poultry or the fowl, basically source. And then they were after water, and Moses cracked a rock, and out came this water for them. So there was things that were brought to them, and then eventually a source of food that came right out of the heavens that was called manna, which some people have translated out of Hebrew, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was, because it was a gift from above. And it landed there, and it was just enough for them to feed them. We don't know what it was made out of, because I wasn't there, but it was a miracle gift of food.
Yeast. There is a huge yeast connection with all of what's going on, and then it just takes a little yeast to add it to the whole dough in order for all of it to rise.
And that's why it was very interesting that the Passover with Christ, when he did the Last Supper, it was a miracle because his body was going to arise representing bread, but it was going to come from a source where there was no yeast, because it was unleavened bread that they ate. So it was a miracle that he would rise as the body without yeast.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
You see, there's so many symbologies involved in what's there. I wish that I had received this. Like, I believe that my fleshly father was doing his best, trying to research the Bible and study it, and then teach and preach. But he didn't see these things because it wasn't the right timing. And the right timing eventually happened because he passed the torch on to me. And I know if he was alive today to see or hear what we're talking about, he would be on board. Because he was there for truth, not sitting on the fence. It's either right or it's wrong. There's no gray area, because that's where we run into problems, because then we can't decide between right and wrong at that point. We go, but there's a middle area. There's this gray area that we're going to debate. And that's not going to happen when you understand letters. Because letters have a message.
So it's connected with the gray matter of the brain as well.
Right. It very much may be related to that. I never even thought about that. So you brought something to light to me that you're right. It could be something related to that, because we've already understood that somehow, if we take the Bible account of Adam and Eve, and then we look at it that so early on into the creation account of God, with this new material creation that was formed out of the minerals of the ground, the earth, and then God's life power source breathed into them the breath of life and gave them energy, animated them into existence. We can understand that we've not really had maybe a long period of time to use the very components that we were given, because we went contrary. We almost went into opposition to God, our creator, and then we ended up in this journey so we could prove to an extent in the evidence that we are not able to rule ourselves without divine direction, which is where we come from, the source of life. So to cut that off, what would we be in? Would we be in something that's very dark and very evil, and therefore very confused? So I can see that our direction right now is where it is for a good reason. why we're seeing what we're seeing, because you almost have to correct a child so far until they wake up that they see a rod of correction leading them in a direct way. So what you're seeing with evil right now, it's correcting the asleep people in general to wake up, because the more evil they get, you should be seeing it and should be going, there's something not right. That's internal, because you couldn't have that without knowledge of God inside you. Mm-hmm. So we're all born with that. We may try to, scar it. We may try to dumb it down through various ways, but that's basically the masses, and the masses have unfortunately been caught up in the confusion more so. And so what they do is they try to herd and control the masses in an institutionalized system. But the ones who actually know the light of truth, which be someone like a spiritual angel like Satan, who's part of the fallen angels that were spoken of in Enoch, the book of Enoch, they basically are here. They're around us. And if you think they're not here, then you have no protection. So the greatest deception that Satan could ever have come up with was the denial of your creator, saying that there's no God, that's an atheism, and the denial that he doesn't exist, because you'd have to be a nut to believe in Satan. Now, like I said, it's easier for me to talk to a Satanist, because to be a Satanist, you have to believe in the enemy of Satan, which is God. To talk to an atheist, he doesn't believe in either. So I have no ground to work with him with, other than the fact I would have to say that he's completely nuts or insane, because he'd be like me sitting beside someone where there's a chair over in a corner of the room, and I said, can you tell me that that chair came about by itself, or did it have a maker? Did someone have to make that? And you're going to tell me that something as complex as us with our DNA and everything that makes us what we are, you're going to tell us that we came about by nothing? Mm-hmm. And then they tell you that there was a Big Bang Theory and it came out of nothing. I go, well, where was the environment where the nothing happened? Mm-hmm. I even talked to a nihilist who said they were a nihilist. I said, you're a nihilist? I go, well, that's really wonderful. You said you don't believe in anything. And I said, just the fact that you said you don't believe in anything says you believe in nothing. Right. So that means you have a belief in nothing.
Exactly. And nothing is no thing if you just move the space too, right?
And that's what Paul said in Galatians 6:3. So they'd be actually rebounding back to truth with that theory that they just said, because a thing is an inanimate object. It's not real. So Paul said, surrounded by the civil world that he was a prosecutor in at one time, Paul said, if a man thinks he is something when he is no thing, he deceiveth his mind. He deceiveth himself. So, because in order to believe in a something, when you are not a thing, you're not. So in other words, he's saying, if you think you're a something, an inanimate thing, when you're not a thing, a no thing, that's like being a somebody or a nobody. In the world of legal, we want to be nobodies. We don't want to be a somebody in legal, because that's some legal body.
It's taking on a status as some, not being the one. And if we are a nobody, it's because our body has been capitalized on and the head removed.
Oh, sorry about that. There's a little bit of interference there. Someone left the phone in the way where we were bringing that out just in case the actual laptop didn't work. So it's not perfect, but hopefully that wasn't very long on the interruption of the video. But everything you're connecting with has got every meaning. That's why I said it's so easy for me to go at everything. I say, oh, look, okay, so I see Laura, and then we take a picture of her in this format, and we put that on the driver's license. Yeah. But the original driver's licenses used to have a red or a pinkish red line right where the head was, between the head and basically the shoulders, where you decapitated somebody. Mm-hmm. And that was because you were, in the essence of what we're trying to do under the driver's license, we're trying to be head. And to be ahead of something, that's called capital punishment would happen. So of course they would put all the letters in the name of the individual in all capital letters to represent punishment. Pun is a joke and ish is a man, because he doesn't understand, so he lives under the state of corrections. But he hasn't been fully executed. He's on a journey. So, we still there?
Yeah, it's just so mind-blowing.
Okay, so when I wrote this today, I put down enter the cave of darkness of letters, because what happens, every letter is a hieroglyph. They just didn't come up with these letters, Laura. Okay, so these letters are like an amalgamation of all the letters of all these different languages over a period of time that are borrowed to make one big confusing language. And that's where the languages were confused, which was Babylon. And that's why we use the term baby in our society, as we use the term goats or kids, right? Because you get goats. Jesus said he would separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep he'd put on the right side and the goats on the left. So uniquely, even on the birth certificate, you put the goat legal name on the left and the sheep name on the right. They're following exactly a code, because you can't break that code, because they're following choice and election to choose between what is right and wrong. So in the journey, there's clues all the way through it to bring you to understanding. That's why the word prodigal means to drive. Okay, so they give you a driver's license when you don't know who you are, and then you're going to traffic in a name that's not yours. You're going to try to claim ownership of something, which is what happened in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve claimed ownership to something that was off-limits property, and then they claimed it, and that was the forbidden fruit. And therefore, the system we live in bids on you doing the same thing, because it's operated under the one who started that whole inducement. So he's run the same inducement for thousands of years and finally got it into a complete framework by the 1900s that's now in paper form to tell you what they're all about. And you would never have the most minions supporting what he does than the lawyers' associations, because these lawyers are part of what is called the practice of deviling. So they basically advocate the devil, and that's why they're known as the devil's advocates. They even had a bar in downtown Toronto that was right down by the Attorney General's office near 595 Bay Street, Toronto. And therefore, we're a better place to have a bar with a serpent figure with a wig and a pitchfork, and it was called the Devil's Advocate Bar. What a great place for these lawyers who work in fiction to meet, to basically control a massive population of commerce. And they're right in the core of where the commercial world is, because they're just literally north of Front Street, where they do all the fronting of the crime. It's a front. The banks are the front. They cover it. Okay? Most of the time we're backing it. You used to have documents, sometimes you signed on the back and sometimes you signed on the front. In some cases you're fronting and sometimes you're backing. It depends on the legal document you were signing. But this would offend people so far into the system, Laura, because the more they have in it, the more aggravating what I say is. So they won't come out of the cave, right? Because they're afraid to leave the cave. Right? So we know about that. And I was someone who actually did a lot of wildlife education in the past, and I raised animals that were born in captivity. Though they were wild of nature, they were only born from generations in captivity. Yeah. So we call that, when we raise them, we would have to take the young, and usually at 3 to 4 days of age, making sure that the mother's milk and the protective enzymes were inside the young to make sure they had an immune system. and then we'd raise them against our sense of smell, what we smelled like. They got used to our heartbeat, everything, and we raised them for months like that. And then eventually we became the parent, but we're really not the parent. Yeah. So welcome to civil society, legal society. It becomes an artificial parent to something that was once pure, clean, and natural. And now it's being raised by something unnatural in a compound name, a given name, which is a natural name, next to a legal name in order to control it. So once you're in that prison, you become imprinted, which means I'm print, because you're imprinting on a natural behavior onto something that was once natural. So what we did was, it's called a trick, because you're tricking the animal into trusting you, that you're actually trustworthy, because nature, God installed into the animals after the flood of Noah an instinct to actually run from man. How do you think Noah got the animals into the ark? He wouldn't have got them into the ark if they were running from him. So before the ark, it says the animals were at peace with man. After the flood, basically, God put, it said right in the scripture that he put fear into the animals to run, because man was now going to pursue them for food. Before that, they were non-meat eaters. So Adam and Eve were vegetarians. The herb of the ground was meat for them. So they were eating vegetation. They weren't eating meat. So all the things are written in there, just as the confusion of the languages show up in that book, which is telling us about the history of where languages came from. You can't talk to a theologian or a researcher in language that can come up with a true explanation of where all these languages came from. It would have had to have come from something, from some source that was given all these people to be able to speak these different languages. And that caused the confusion to move away from the city of Babylon, and they exited from there because they couldn't continue the building of this building that was going up to the sky. So that was the first pyramid. That was actually the first pyramid that ever happened.
Where does sorcery tie in with all of this? Because you're talking about the source.
Oh, and okay. So, when we talk about, we have the book, I have a little book here. It's also written by the same publisher of the Canadian Gage Dictionary, and it's called Gage Canadian Thesaurus. There you've got the saurus, the serpent. Because the saurus also means treasure trove. So all the monies are held under a spell. That's why the national treasurer is all the legal surnames worldwide, because every nation uses that legal surname system in order to control property. So if all the property in the world is controlled under a last name that's not your name, and you protect it, clean it, look after the property, rake the leaves, clean the eaves troughs, repair all the building, and you're doing it your own labor, and the other one sits there saying, I'm your hours, because you work for wages on this. You'd like to gamble with your life to believe that a title that is not yours is yours in a world of fiction. We own you, because if you think you're the owner, you'll work harder.
Well, it's called being a surety. And it literally, in the definition on the government site, it says that a surety is a big responsibility, and you really want to think hard before you agree to be a surety for someone else. Because then you're liable for all of the debts, duties, obligations that are applied to the person for whom you are assuming responsibility and liability.
So they need someone to assume their person. That's called the security of the person. So it wouldn't be the greatest thing at the end to actually reverse it now. We said they've been carrying around documents, imposturing that they're the legal person. Now what we need to do is put that legal person data in them. So now we're going to secure our legal person in their person that will carry in a chip 30 million pieces of basically code in it. this is already in place. They already have the ability to do this. They've done it with, what we say animals. So they've been shipping animals for ages. And now basically they're going to do the same thing. Now what they do with animals, they don't allow you to walk into an animal veterinarian hospital without agreeing to vaccinate that animal for so many things that they believe is going to affect the animals that are vaccinated. That makes no sense. So you bring an unvaccinated animal into a vaccinated scenario of animals that have already been vaccinated. They're saying you're a threat to them, so you need to vaccinate the animal. Are they not following the same pattern?
Well, you said going to inject them, and it's just like, from my understanding, that's already taken place with the...
It's a contaminated system. Even the animals now are experiencing what was never there in the history of animals. They've weakened the bloodlines of animals so that now the animals are not pure anymore. So it's a horrible reality to wake up to. But when the very thing that they can control the whole system on is based on letters, language, we have to understand that hierarchy is the root for hieroglyphs. And so the hierarchy of the language that we're using right now understand the words we're using, and they're able to more so manipulate the spell of those words and the manipulation of those spells in order to cast them upon you to make you a cast member in the movie of fiction.
Well, even in court and at school, they do a roll call.
Absolutely. And it's always the last name. So they know what is the primary, but they know that they need to, like, in a kind of a, shall we say, in a secondary level, they know that the individual is going to attach themselves to it. So even with calling out the last name, the odds in a general classroom that 30 students are not going to, or are going to have basically different names, that works out. So they never have like an overlap generally with names in a small groups. That's why they group them in their study patterns and their teaching institutional methods, where they're dealing with probably the odds that we're not going to have 5 Smiths in the same room. So when we yell out Smith, we know the one guy with the name John is going to come forward and think it's his name. And that's how this works. It's an inducement to believe that something which is false is true. And once you do that, I take training and I have to imprint you. And then I need to create print. And then you're going to basically believe your print, because that's I'm print. Okay. Yeah. So this is amazing. If we want to say mind control, this is yes, is this a brain wash? Yes. Well, it's a wash with dirty water. It's not a wash with clean water. It's not washing you in purity. It's washing you with impurity. And therefore, what is proper is now improper. It's not the same.
With the Mental Health Act, that is a perfect example, and we're going to actually get into that more in the next Mind Control Programming and Propaganda Summit, which is going to be on April 8th. So we're going to come together and focus more on the Mental Health Act. But I say that in relation to what you're saying, because you're talking about clean water or liquid and impure water. But we're also talking about like mental disorders. Throw a pill on it and expect the order to be changed in some way other than to be made messier by the addition of an additional substance that's unfamiliar to the terrain.
Everything is like kind of in reverse. The whole concept of civil registration was already in place before what happened with the Roman Catholic Church 4 centuries later, when they brought in child baptism, because they were trying to say that the child with no consent was going to be sponsored by 2 people, the godmother and godfather, which show up on the birth certificate, a male and a female. The deputy is always a female from my research, and the male is always the registrar general. And then they're the sponsors. And the word godmother and godfather, you can look this up. It comes out of, when I was researching word origins, this is what tripped me onto it, though I could have found it in other dictionaries. But this one led me to the understanding that the term godmother and godfather came from the word gossip, which means hearsay. And see, hearsay evidence is not really admissible in a court of law unless someone's consenting to the hearsay.
Yeah.
So if I walk in saying, hearsay I am, this hearsay last name, you've automatically consented, and there's no burden of proof upon the court to try to prove otherwise.
Right.
But when you really take it in reality, if you were brought in there involuntarily against your consent, and then they said, you are this legal surname fiction, well, then you could say, I place the burden of proof upon the prosecutor and the one who's charging me with the use of this name to prove that I have any legal entitlement to the use of this name. And they have nothing in the court to prove that you have any legal entitlement. It's all based on you stepping onto the sticky flypaper of legal.
Well, the sticky flypaper is take the stand, because if you're standing on the stand, then you have no standing, because a man or woman stands and does things with verbiage.
Yes.
Compared to when you step onto the sticky tape, so to speak, of, as you said, of the stand, then you're statusing because you're fitting into the box and onto the box, and then falling under their jurisdiction, which is what the last name ropes us back under if we're willing to accept the joinder. And we're implied to be a surety for our person, which is why unless we correct that misinterpretation, then we are implied to be that which we are not.
And as the Canadian and the English law system is based on accusatory law, and it says that in the scripture that Satan was the accuser of the spiritual children of God. He's the accuser. It's an accusatory system that you're being accused right from the get-go at the statement of birth record that the parents fill in as informants, that you will use that name in the future and you will trespass on it. And then they're gambling on whether or not you will do that, and they issue a nice lottery ticket. Okay, but they're still responsible for it because they're the ones that sign it. You never signed this, therefore it has no authority over you. And in fact, you have the authority to use their seal. But the problem is they get everybody to actually sign, which leads to the word sin, because you take out the G in sign, because you don't pronounce G. It's a silent letter to make you wake up to what the word really is. That's why the English language is such a crazy language for me to get into the alphabet. And all I was trying to compare in that between the book of Job and the book of Job was because we're using English letters. And in fact, the book of Job wouldn't be spelled the book of J-O-B, because I was a previous letter before we adopted the letter J to remove the letter I. So it would have been I-O-B. Well, if I-O-B, B is the common side, so that means you owe the common shares. That's why it's to be or not to be. That is the question. The B is always the worker. That's the commoner. And commoners were the prostitutes who were used in the legal sense to sell their bodies for money. It's not to say that your bodies could not do labor, but when I got you to sell your body for money, now I can buy you. Right? Is it right to buy somebody? If someone's vote can be bought?
Well, if you actually look at the word journey, you see that joy starts and ends the word, and then we're left with earn in between, which we think that the URNE is a casket, or like the container that you put a body into after it's been cremated. But actually that is without the E, and with the E, that is a ballot box, which says so much.
Exactly. It's just like we've been trained to, instead of saying the word greetings, okay, and if you look in scripture, most of the writers would say greetings. They never said the word hello. Well, what's hello? Well, you got hell in there to begin with. Now, if I have a misplaced trust, I place my trust in something that's not good, then I've been burned, right?
Yeah.
And that was the teaching of hellfire. It was just symbolic that you were burned. You put your trust not in your creator. You put your trust in the princes and nobles of men who are operated by evil. So you could never trust people in political power because they're not there for that purpose. They're not there for the creation of God. They're there for fiction. And because they control the fiction, they're always going to be making what they call decisions for the public interest. The public interest is monetary tax collection. So if something's not going right and they can't collect enough from it, the best thing to do is to eliminate all the independent sureties that are out there that claim themselves to be members of the public who surety this note that makes them a member of the public for tax collection. Yeah. So if they're not paying, what do? Eliminate the debt. So we send them out. And now the commercial world said, well, it's a lot easier just to shoot them at the hospital or shoot them with false information. And because fiction's a lie, could you lie to a fiction? You can't lie to someone who's already in fiction, which is a lie. So it's a ridiculous concept. It's like, could you kill someone who's already a dead body corporate? Could you suffocate something that's already dead? So they go, they're already dead anyways. It's just a matter of time until we get them there.
What about
this is called mercy killing.
Mercy killing. Oh my God. Dan, before we go off further, I want to say that you mentioned earlier about the distinction between a testimonial and hearsay. And I think that it's really important because while we're talking about the origins of words and letters, what we're not talking about directly, but that is very important to bring into this conversation, is the fact that notices of liability, anyone that is using a template of any kind, firstly, I always warn, could be subject to the application of the term OPCA litigant, which is organized pseudo-legal commercial argument litigant, because you're part of a group and you're following someone else's template, which makes it so that you are not speaking of your own accord and you're following some guru outside of yourself, and then you're ultimately dismissed and everything that you've been doing to advocate for yourself is erased when they create a joinder of the application of another and a new status to the man or woman. But that's one piece. But then the other piece that I just want to say, and I would love for you to be able to chime in around this too, is the fact that when you use someone else's template, and with this whole con video game drama and everything that's been going on with it the entire time, the use of any video evidence that cannot be cited directly from the source of it is not going to be applicable in the court of law. So anyone that has used a notice of liability by any of the groups that have created templates that included a whole lot of different evidence around the dangers of what is happening right now and the need to stop it legally. Basically, from my understanding, anybody that referenced somebody's video they don't have firsthand access to call onto the stand should it get to that level of a trial, as you say, where they'll try all, then that man or woman is not able to use that evidence anyway.
Yeah, they know that what's happening is truth is walking in and joined her to fiction, And that's why they can always go ex parte, which means for one party only. So if you don't show up to the court, they're really only after the usage of that last name that belongs to the state. So it's always one party that they can award the judgment to. They just want to know who to send the mail to. And because the fact is you're using it, everything they can do to you is based on the concept of blackmail. Because they send everything in the mail written in black. So wouldn't that be blackmail? Mm-hmm. It's darkness mail. Yes, there may be a nice little white background, okay, that basically handles what it is, but it's actually darkness in the light. So their world is darkness in the light. It's causing darkness. Mm-hmm. That's why when they executed Jesus, the world went into darkness at that time. There was like an eclipse. It actually blocked the sun. They've actually found the date of the execution of Christ to match an actual eclipse that actually caused darkness in the world at that moment, or on the earth, that actually caused that eclipse. So, it's we've turned a world into a world of make-believe. We've turned it into a world that everything's for sale, that everything's based on monetary value. You can't make that work because it doesn't work. And what we're caught up in now is how do you basically protect yourself? How do you spiritually protect yourself in a world of evil? Mm-hmm. Well, you have to realize how that other side operates and how they run the spell and how they operate the inducement. And so we're already protected in code through the scripture. It's given us a code, okay? And code, of course, we got that letter C again, right? There's the letter C, and then there's the balance letter, 0. No breakage in there. It's balanced. And then D, and I always say it's very interesting. It's a reverse C with an I attached to it. So it's like I enter something immediately. And then it's got D, it's got the letter E, which is the power source, which also is when we attach that, we know even in the letter L, it's very powerful when EL comes right immediately. But EL is Elohim, which is God, when we're translating as best we can into English in the code, but the power source into God, but it's the power. And that's why we use that even in electricity symbols. An E is a power source. So it's C, balance, okay? Because the cave is open, right? The C is open, so you can leave. There's no door there. We don't have a letter that looks like that, okay? So we don't have that there, so it's an open. Nothing could stop anybody from leaving the cave. The cave has an entry, and you can still get back out the way you came in. Then it leads to the O, which is the balance. And then it goes to I, first person, and then it closes that first person so it protects you. And then it leads to the electricity, the power. And there's the code. Now, people say, where did you get that from? I don't know. I just took it from the hieroglyphs. I'm trying to read the symbols to understand the language. And so you can understand that mainstream would just say, that guy's totally insane. He's got no book that we've approved to let him say that. Right. That's what bothers them, Laura.
Well, have you ever heard of certification being called completely eradicate radical thinking?
Absolutely. Just and it's like true.
CERB is completely eradicate radical behavior, because if everyone's subdued because they can't do all of these things or they'll get cut off, then it's easier to control.
So what a better way to do is to teach them a mainstream language direction that they only understand what you want them to understand.
Right.
And then that's the language that they repeat over and over. So they're already ready to be parrots. The teacher writes on the board, they copy. That's not learning. Just so you know that. I always tell people, what I do here is because I researched it to put it on the board.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not there to, mock that there isn't good things that happen in teaching. Because there is some good things. There are good things that happen in teaching. But the majority of the agenda, teachers know that there's like this dark thing that rides over top of them to prevent them from actually teaching the children the way they should. They know it. They're not happy with the system.
Yeah.
So teachers know they've been pushed into a very, very tight position. And, and then they've got these commercials on TV with teachers wearing masks.
Of course.
Showing that is if that the only way you're going to have safety with your child is to have this continually masked situation over truth. Yeah. There's no natural individual who needs a mask. That's a ridiculous concept. It makes no sense. And even the Roman idea of butchery and surgery, where they open someone up and start tearing someone up, that's not holistic treatment of the body. Holistic treatment of the body is to find the source of the problem and not cut them open with a knife to try to remove something, butcher them, and then put a price tag on it.
Yeah.
That's mainstream medical practicing.
Have you heard of holistic as whole eye stick?
Oh, okay, that's good.
Right?
That's good. Yeah, you have to look at every word. I was doing this with someone the other day, and I said, certain words that I put out there, I can't always just join them all the way. So we were doing with the word, because I put up the word quarantine, and then I put up the word, it means to isolate. And isolate, you can't just take is and then go olate, because it's not a word. The next word after is not olate. So I have to go through a little bit of a work program on what's in that letter combination to actually try to get to the bottom of what that word means. But then I can always take the letters, because I understand the message in the letters, and then I take that all together. Okay, so I'll give you a for instance now of some things I do. And
I just wanted to say that when a yawn happens sometimes, I just want to share my BS around the fact that when a yawn takes place, it's not because of being tired. It's because space is being made in the energy of us. So just recognize if you find yourself getting really tired, or you're yawning a lot and you're not even tired, recognize that space is actually being made in the vessel of you.
Exactly. So we're going to take, for instance, the word evil, okay? Now, uniquely, you reverse that and you get live. Mm-hmm. There's a very simple, so if I reverse evil, I get to live, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't that a very simple concept right there? Now, God is in L, because L, you can't say the letter L without saying L, which is the beginning of Elohim. That's why it's even in the word angel, because it's got EL, because the angels came from God. They were spirit sons of God. So you can't escape this. Then you got the letter I, which I always say is first person. Okay, so it's a very, very important, because it brings a kind of a separation that right after there's God, there's I, and then V is a very intake, because if you look at the way the letter is shaped, it allows everything down into it. So it's like part of a W. When you look at a W, you've actually, in reality, to an extent, it's almost like two V's are happening there. It's almost like a W looks like someone sitting on the ground. Sometimes they draw it like this. So it looks like a butt when we draw it. So it's like someone sitting on the ground looking up. It has that feel to it. Just like the letter Y looks almost like a surrender with two arms. Because if we're going to draw a body with two arms, the only thing that's missing there is a head, because you're really not in charge anyway, so we'll be missing a head. You can't have a head on a surrender because you were never in charge. So you weren't head. You weren't in the head position. So the surrender, of course, has that. So the V relates to a Y, which relates to an I. So it's I vow, because I always put that every time I find words that relate to V, I get the word vow in there, which is part of vowel. And you know what, to be unselfish, I owe you, not myself. I owe you to help you. Mm-hmm. Okay? But we have I owe you and sometimes Y, which still surrenders. Okay, so there is definitely a code going on in these letters. And because we didn't get a book that would totally go down that, what I did was I said, I'm going to look at every usage of a letter and try to find out what happens if I go into an Oxford dictionary that has the 20 volumes that originally was the language that was put out there under Oxford. Not a one-volume dictionary. It was 20 volumes. Do you want to see the size of one of the volumes? That's one volume. There's 20 of these to make a dictionary. Now, the interesting thing about that is, what's that?
Your video is frozen.
When we go to, is it okay?
Yeah.
So the one dictionary, did you see that one dictionary?
No, we didn't see how the dictionary was.
That's one volume of 20.
Wow.
This is the English language according to Oxford. Now, what's interesting about the Oxford Dictionary, they had 10,000 submissions come in from one source at one time, because they asked the people to collectively file a word definition, take a word and submit what they believe the meaning was, and they were to follow the format. So they got submissions from one location on 10,000 words. And when they traced where it was coming from, because they were completely accurate, and Oxford used them in the compilation of their dictionary that they released that had 20 volumes. The actual source came from an insane asylum. They wrote a book on it called The Professor and the Madman. Because the most submissions he ever got was someone in an institutionalized insane asylum. How did he get there? Maybe he went down the dark rabbit hole of words.
He found
it's
stranger than fiction.
But you can look up the book. It is an interesting story. It's called The Professor and the Madman. Wow. So when you're looking at the 1828 Noah Webster, it's no bigger than the size of this Black's Law Dictionary, 10th edition. No bigger. It's about the same size. So did Noah Webster dumb down the language for the American population, considering that there would have been 20 volumes available of information? And Samuel Johnson's dictionary was huge. It came in 2 volumes, the first edition. So there was a 2-volume set of that alone. Now, we're very fortunate that people have done painstaking research to actually get these dictionaries available to people now so they can understand the meanings of the words. It's not a chance. I found written by an author with the last name Lynch, and then basically I did receive a first edition. Okay, now it's not probably absolutely complete, but it's pretty good for a first edition. It is available. You can find it. Someone sent it to me as a gift because they knew I was going down the direction of language. There is a book called Letter Perfect, which gets into some really deep understandings of the letters and where they came from.
Does that mean?
So it wasn't one source. Just so you know that. It's called Letter Perfect.
There's such a thing as perfect?
Well, it's interesting that the prosecutors in the Roman court were called prefects. So they tried to put an R before an E. It's like a persecutor versus a prosecutor. There's reasons for the words. What's going on? We've been taught a legalistic civil language that comes from especially the civil history of the Romans, and we call that Latin. And Latin, it's the tin. And tin is the most worthless metal out there. So it came from the most worthless source of language to tell you it was called a dead language because it's for the dead, not the living. Hebrew was for the living, not the dead. So we have a big journey on this, but it's there. That's why, like, there's so many. Like, I can take apart your name, Laura. I can tell you why you are the way you are. If you're acting in energy of that name, there's people that are sleepers. They could have the same name, Daniel, but they're sleepers. They're not acting as Daniel. Daniel, translated out of Hebrew, means God is my judge. My middle name is John. Not to say that really matters in English law because you're considered only to have a first name and a last name. So the middle names really don't have any merit. But I'm just going to say my parents gave it merit by giving me a second name. The second name is God is forgiveness. God forgives. That's what John means. Now, John wrote, of course, I call it the Genesis of the New Covenant or the New Testament scriptures, because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So when I'm looking at that, in the beginning was the Word, that's God's promise. That's the Word, I give you my word. And the Word was with God because Christ was considered the firstborn of creation. So he's the first thing that God decided to create out of himself, and that was his only begotten Son. Okay? So he gave, out of a labor of love, his own Son to send him back as a messenger that he would send there to show that Adam didn't need to do what he did as a selfish man. And he could have followed love and honor and good loyalty, but he didn't. And he committed treason with the first mate on the earth ship. With his first mate that was a gift from God. He came from his own body, so against his own body. When he actually even blamed God for giving him Eve. What a spineless weenie husband he was. He actually blamed his wife, and she wasn't there when the first command happened. So he literally blames God for giving him a gift, and he didn't look after her properly. He wasn't there to help her. He didn't love her enough. And he never said, hey, we made a mistake. No, what he does is he joins in on the mutiny. So now it's mutiny on the ship. And then off the ship they go into exile. There's so much built into all this, but it's understood that it's in letters. That's why I said Adam, when I look at it, they may say that the Hebrew translation of Adam, like Job, could mean something else than what I'm saying that we found out in the English language, what Job is, okay? But it's got almost like a dual meaning going on. So Adam, I look at him as he's the dam, he's a dam that stopped the flow of life. So he's the eight damnations that are out there that run imaginations of the evil who enticed him into the fiction. Don't worry that he ate from a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they covered up with fig leaves, which would be a figment of their imagination. The God didn't know what their body looked like without putting a cover up. So now they went undercover. And then they gave God the fig, which is the finger, and the only fruit that is known in horticulture that carries what they call true and false seed. It means some seeds germinate, some seeds don't. So it's like a castration of the seed. One seed is good, one seed is no good. You can put it in the ground, it won't germinate anything. That's called the fig tree. So we know which tree they ate from, and it certainly wasn't the apple that was put out there by the Catholic Church to deceive you in believing that that was basically what they ate from. They ate from the fig tree, and you'll verify that out of the book of Jasher, which they pulled out of the Bible, which is spoken of in the Bible, but they pulled it out. As it is written in the book of Jasher. We're not hidden the knowledge. It's coming to light, as is the book of Enoch, which is spoken of in the Bible, which would tell us how man knows how to do the things he does today because he was given this enlightenment on how to do the things he does from fallen angels. So there's clues. There's clues coming into being on this. So when I hear that it'll be the fall of her of Revelation, the fall, I take it to be the fall of the calendar. Because I see it as a fall, which is when everything starts to drop off the tree, right? All the leaves drop off the tree. Mm-hmm. It's a dormant period. It's like where it kind of almost looks like it's going into a death or a frozen zone. Okay, until it recovers later. So we're in this unfortunately we call it the time of fallen man, the fall of when man went into debt, into sin, into guilt. And so they run a system that puts this tag on you that says you will not wake up. We've taken over your mind. We're in your temple. And the scripture knows that God said that you are the temple, and in you God is there. He says he doesn't reside in any man-made temple. So then why are we building all these temples for these places that claim that they have the knowledge of God? Why are they building these temples and structures everywhere? But it sure keeps the people in debt who actually ferment the labor and the time and the monies to build these temples. And that's the connection, because it always leads back to the commerce and to the money. So is there anything that I haven't explained
you had said it's really, I think it's really important because it goes back to the fact that we can play the game of life as a pawn, a bishop, a castle, queen, king.
Yes.
We have to choose which position we're going to actually take within the game. And you were saying on a call about the fact that the Tower of Babel, it actually took upwards of a year sometimes before anyone would even pass anyone in transit in taking the resources up to the top where they were working, because the ego of the man had gotten so high on himself that the pawns were then just sent to the front lines, like King David did with the man's whose wife he wanted, sent him to the front lines to be killed so he could get her added to his harem.
It's interesting. There's a film director or producer, and it's really weird that he ends up. Have you ever heard anybody ever naming their child Nimrod? There's an actual producer, director of a movie, and guess what it was called? Predators. Right. Where they're all landing on some weirded out place based on these guys. Now I have to tell you that they're predating on you. The system they're all predators that run the evil, so they need prey. Now remember, spiritual people pray.
Dan, we can't hear you well enough for you to carry on. Brilliant. Carry on. One second. We can't hear you. You went choppy.
So predators. Okay, so predator, okay, also sounds like predator. Did you hear that? Okay, so predators predate things. So you'll notice on the birth record, there is the date of birth and then the registration of birth.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting because the registration of the legal birth name in reality comes after birth, the natural birth, because they register it on that date. So they're predators because they're always asking you for your date of birth to link into their registration of birth. But the date of birth and the registration of birth are two different dates. So these guys are predators, predators. They're predating you.
Wow. Yep.
So
Before we went further as well, Dan, I wanted to ask whether A and E go anywhere in your IOU-Y
okay.
dynamic.
Okay, so I'm going to wipe this off here for a second.
And I will say too, we're scheduled for an hour and a half today, and I really appreciate your time. I've got more time if you do, so I'm happy however it goes. But
I'll be loose on it for now. There's no problem. I don't have anything that's interrupting it. Okay. So we'll go to whatever you feel. That's great. There's no problem. Whatever you feel is good, we can go that far. So when we're dealing with an A, you see it's got a support in the middle. So it's like almost like to an extent, it's supporting structure there. I don't use the lowercase more than not. The reason I don't, because they weren't part of the original Roman alphabet. And I can't really tell you to an extent why the purpose of this came into being, because it wasn't part of the original language hieroglyphs of what we call the Roman alphabet, if we're going to use that term alphabet. And again, the Romans had their own letter system, every system, but when we're talking about generally, for whatever reason, we seem to want to use the terminology from the Greek, which is alphabet, because they had the first letter and the second letter. So A, which is very interesting, is a very serious letter. Now, when it shows up in things to do with law, in Roman law, it meant absolution. You're absolved. They put it on prisoners who were being charged with a crime, and if they absolved them and acquitted them, they put an A on them. Now, it's interesting, the statement of birth record, most people don't look at the records as closely as I do, because I'm reading it for a purpose to understand what's on there. Now, it's interesting, it'll say outside the frame, outside, remember that, you're only framed, right? This is a frame around the birth record for Ontario that the parents fill out at the hospital. On the top, it says certified, and then it puts A with a capital letter, true, photosite print of a record. They have a in lowercase when they put a record. So we know A has to mean something because it's been titled with a capital. They use lowercase over in the of a record, but certified A is part of title. It means something in title. And so it's absolute title. Okay, so it means absolved, because the fact is that truth happened on the calendar event that this birth really did happen on. It didn't happen on a BC that they issue out of this document. They issue, it was an AD document, because that represents that there was the highest sovereignty came into existence on an event that the Roman civil empire were involved in. And therefore, they can't hide it. It's a historical record. And they actually executed him as a king. So they can't say that he wasn't in sovereignty. You can't execute someone as a king without saying he was a king. In order to execute title, that's like a will. So they executed the will of God and said that Jesus was a king. And because he came from the tribe of Judah, truly he meant king of the Jews. They put over top of him, because king of the Jews, Jew meant Judah, meant tribe of Judah. So he was king of the tribe of Judah. So they executed him as a king, which says they crossed the line on a sovereignty.
Yep.
Okay, so he came as the last king, the fulfillment of a spiritual kingdom. That's why he said, my kingdom's not of the world, the civil world, the material world. It's of a spiritual realm, which they had no jurisdiction over, because the spirit of you is from God. So you represent the spirit of where your life force came from. And he came as the last Adam. So when they put A on there, A is very, very, very important, because it represents absolution. When you look wherever A shows up, it'll mean in insurance ratings, Lloyd's of London will rate a ship based on a rating. So an A1 rating or a AAA is based on something having a super value. Okay, so A is a very, very important because it comes in first. And Abel, okay, who was disabled by Cain in the Bible under violence, that was the first murder, the first execution, okay, and he came out of Adam because he was the firstborn of Adam, then came Abel, and then Cain disabled Abel. So they're going to put in their system someone who represents the mark of Cain. And Cain, you know, if you lean on a Cain, it may be not spelled the same way, but Cain is a Leon. And he even spoke about being isolated because of what he did and worrying about being attacked by anybody. So he said, I need something to protect me. And God said that if anybody tries to execute vengeance on Cain, 7 times will come upon them. So it's very interesting in the legal world that if you try to execute your value, because the surname runs the Cain, the Leon, the alien, someone away from God, who's not able, okay, he actually has now put himself into disabled position as a debtor, okay? He basically has the mark of Cain, and if you actually go into bankruptcy, surprisingly, and try to kill this certificate, you'll have 7 times bad credit, 7 years of bad credit. And it said right back in Genesis that 7 times like a damnation would come on anybody who ever tried to do anything to Cain. So you're trying to kill Cain when you even go bankrupt. You're trying to actually execute what represents his estate of debt. They're running a system so controlled. Like I said, remember, if you go into the book of Jasher, it actually says that the actual instrument that he killed Abel with was a club. Okay, so what do we try to do to everybody out there that's waking up to spirituality? I don't want to be part of this anymore. So you have the guys walking around with clubs, right? And saying you're a member of the club whether you want to be or not. You're part of the Canadian club. They must be intoxicated. I thought Canadian club was whiskey. So they hit you over a club because they say you're a member of the club whether you want to be or not. I thought it was to be or not to be. I didn't want to be a member of the B side. I want to be part of the A side, the Abel side, not the B side.
This ties in with the with that movie. I think it's called The Big Short, about the stock market and how they were using the mortgages that nobody wanted to insure to then back one another. So then mortgages were backed by mortgages that couldn't be sold, so were packaged.
So here's the code in Abel. Abel was the one. So it's always a second born in the pattern in the Bible, the ones that get the actual birthright. Okay, so remember, they put the surname in first place on the birth record. So on these statement of birth records filled in Ontario, the surname comes first in legal because that represents sin, debt, and guilt, which represents Adam's bloodline, the seed of the serpent now. Then comes second, the given name, okay? So when you look at Abel, you got A-B-L. There's God. He was with God. God approved Abel's sacrifice. Abel sacrificed from the best of his flock. It appeared Cain was holding something back. That's why his sacrifice wasn't accepted. It wasn't because he sacrificed vegetables according to the Genesis account. It wasn't because the vegetables were not good to God. It was because there was something about what he held back. He wasn't giving the best of his produce in the sacrifice to God as a thank you to his creator for him giving him life. And so Abel got God's approval. So you've got it right in the spelling of how we do it in English. So you got A, absolute, B, God, with God. So he was with God. That's why it always said that the righteous men of the Bible walked with the true God. They were with God because they were of him. They were operating with conscience. They were not working in a selfish direction. They were not working in violence and evil. So there's just like one code right there on it. But you got, you've got people that they're not seeing how deep this goes, but it's there for a reason. And so you got the A, even the B of a company. You got the A shares and the B shares. And then the B shares are called the common shares. But B is a worker, right? So the B is the worker shares, because you couldn't have the preferred shares without controlling the common shares you issue. And the preferred side has to buy back the common shares by law. They have to buy back their stock that they issued. So even the A buys back the B. So God even sent his son to buy back the sinners, the commoners, who walked into sin from Adam. Adam took us into the B side.
Well, that's what we're here for. We're here to make one another home.
Yeah. And so the Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question. Well, to be or not to be? Do you want to be on the B side? Or do you want to be on the absolute side? The absolute side's a gift, okay? That's a gift to earn. And that's why you can't earn your salvation in the system that they've set up. It's impossible. You're always trying to continue to pay and pay and pay, because it works on not a gift. It works on the idea of a talent. If you look up the difference between a talent and a gift is something that's just there. It's in you. A talent was always referred to as something, because they even referred to a talent as a measurement in the money system. So talents were a measurement of gold, or a certain level of something that was dealing with increments of value, not invaluable. A talent is not the same as a gift. If I say you're gifted, that's not talented. Gifted means something from a supernatural source. It came within you. You have it. It's already in you. So when people ask me, how do you exist? I said, I'm very gifted. Because that's how I've lived doing this teaching since probably 2007.
Well, the gift of the present is now.
Right. Because you're present to do good. So it's a present. So you're living in the present, not the past. The past will lead you to the guilt and the sin of evil, instead of leading you going forward ahead as if that sin never happened. And that's why the term born again was installed by the legalists into the King James Bible, instead of what the Aramaic version of the Gospels stated, that it was back to the Genesis. It was back to the time before Adam sinned. So it says that's why Christ came as the last Adam. So you're going to put him in place. He passed the test. He was loyal. He didn't cause treason against his maker. So he passed the test. But Adam did not pass that test. So it's just the simplicity of the born again, which is a problem, because if I put the word again in there, gain means money or mammon. So what they try to claim in their legal version of the Bible is you were born a surname. You're born again. So they're saying we took your spirit and we put you into a dead body corporate. That's what they called the term born again. And there's the Pentecostals with their hands up in the air. And you know what I told a bunch of Pentecostals? I said, you better change your name, because you should be repenting. You need to be called Repentecostals, because you don't know what you're talking about, because you're trying to be born again. That's not what it is. You shouldn't be born in an idea of something to do with mammon or greed. And that's what gain is about. They don't understand. That's positive law. A name added to one's real name. And who are the ones who promote the idea of positive man's law versus God's law? They're called what? They're called adders. And an adder is a poisonous snake. They're called adders. Wouldn't they promote positive law? A name added to one's real name, so they're snakes. Poisonous vipers. One of the most poisonous viper snake that's in the Mediterranean. It's called an adder. And then, of course, what is adding a name to your real name? Canadian Gauge Dictionary, a surname is a name added to one's real name. Well, wouldn't that be adding diction to your name? Wouldn't that be an addiction? And when you become addicted, and if the surname means the money, the commerce, wouldn't you be addicted to the money? This unraveling of all this, it's in front, and we'll do this over and over and over. You don't have to worry. Like, as long as I'm breathing, you're okay on that. Like, I'm there to share this because I know that's what energizes me.
Yeah.
If I didn't have the moment to do this, I just don't know I could handle things.
Yeah, I feel you, and I so appreciate you. And we are having some technological issues, so what we might just say is that it just seems to lag sometimes. So I'm not sure whether that's just generally.
It could be at my end or it could be at your end.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
It could be just there's a lot of wind today.
Yeah, that's very true here as well. What might be the best idea, Dan, is to pull today to a close.
Okay.
I do want to say that we are coming back together on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. So that's going to be where Dan and Ethan James, I always say Ethan James because my nephew's name is Ethan James. Ethan Lucas is actually coming on. And so he has an uncommon understanding of the Bible. And we're going to have next Tuesday's call at 9 in advance of an incredibly special pre-Easter treat. Which is going to be where we're going to talk about who was Jesus and his story in relation to how we can all come alive the way that things have been laid for us to be able to do, such as the fact, for me personally, it was my summons that has brought me back to life in a way I had never been alive before last April when I needed to be, because my name was being smeared and I was going to be held liable for all of the consequences for my person. And having gotten locked up in a mental institution the year before, there was no effing way that I was going to play that game. So
right.
I didn't get a lawyer because a lawyer would only be able to represent me, the woman, as my person and to convert me into the interface that they can use to work with me and through me.
Right. Actually, just to end just on that, just because you brought that up so quickly on there, you know, I just try to tell you that the F is a wrench letter. You know, just like you ever seen the shape of a wrench and you can adjust the wrench and it closes down on something?
Yep.
So what it does is it wrenches the next letter, which is the U. So it F's U. That's why the first legal surname in the history of legalism was Emperor Fu, Emperor Fu. He brought in the introduction to legal surnames upon the population. So you can see that it's Fu and then C, and I know that this letter here is crazy because it has a lot to do with knowledge because of how it's set up there in the way the structure of the letter is. So it's Fuck. How you see knowledge. And so that's why this word has come into so much vocabulary usage in the English language for so long. And it also, you know, when we say that and we put this in front of it, okay, that means no intercourse. I can't have any intercourse. So you couldn't have intercourse in their system without speaking that name. So the minute that an officer, which we nicknamed a cop or a copper, right? When you speak to a cop, you do oxygen onto copper. And what happens to copper? When you put oxygen onto copper, it turns green. That's how they get the green, the money, because you're speaking to the officer.
Bastards.
There you go. So it's connected in so many different ways. That's why I said for people, I know at first this may just seem like, oh my goodness, Dan, it's just like all over the place and it's this and it's that, but it's not really. It's just, I just said I know how to pull the right things at the right time into the right part of the conversation.
Exactly.
So that you understand, because we're in a very visual society now, different than any other time and age. There was no videos, and there was nothing like this before. We had no telephone communication. Everything had to be done physically in front of somebody or with written paper to tell a message. Now we don't really do that in the same way. Now everything's gone into this tech. And that's the subtlety word that shows up in the book of Genesis when it says the serpent was the most subtle creature in the garden. And the etymology for the word subtle in English is the word tech and web. What are the odds of that? So it says that the serpent would have the most tech and the most web right now. And what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. Welcome to the lawyers, welcome to the legal system, and welcome to everything that's around us. And we call it the World Wide Web, because you get internet.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, and the movie that I was watching, ironically, is actually another Scarlett Johansson movie my friend Neil Sperling and I watched, who I'll have to connect you with. And it's that one where she turns into the web. She turns into the computer. She turns into black goo or plasma. And I'm not one that knows anything about all of what plasma is said to be and the significance of that. But I just feel like it's significant because when I start looking at everything that's going on and then we make other connections, we start to see that we have actually been turned into antennas. And if we actually recognize that, yes, that's what this whole covert psyop has been about in terms of making us more conductible by making us more metallic. But there's also the fact that our thoughts literally are things, and our thoughts are like neurotransmitters that then go out into the airwaves of the universe that are then received by the creator of all of it and then given back to us in the form of people, places, and things. And so going back earlier where you were talking about something, no thing, if somebody called you a thing, you'd be pretty offended, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
So really making that distinction and then kind of just taking as much as we can chew with any one bite without getting a bellyache and knowing we can always come back for more. So sincerely appreciate you for making more time today.
Okay, yeah, just the system is basically just a web of legal sectarian movement, and they have to have an insect get caught in the web, and that's how they feed on it. And so there's no possibility they can parasite without you being attached to it, and that's what we're getting into. We're talking about remedy. You can't be remedy. Have the remedy if you're in there, part of what they're doing, trying to pesticide you.
Oh my
so,
God.
Anyways, we'll be talking to you on Tuesday.
Yeah, look forward
to
it.
Laura.
Thank you so much. And everyone that has gained something from today, please do make sure you check out the YouTube video where this has been streaming and leave your comments there. Give it a like. Also, please give it a share. Let's get this uncommon information out so we stop actually feeding the scared prostitute inside of us, because on an archetypal level, we all have the archetype, which is a familiar pattern. We either fill in with fear or faith. And that means the prostitute within us is either scared or sacred. And nobody wants to think we've got a prostitute inside. But the reality is we either know our price, which is what the scared prostitute knows. And then we also have the sacred prostitute, which is the part of us that knows what we won't sell ourselves out for. And getting really clear on that will help all of this make a whole lot of sense.
That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura. So we'll talk on Tuesday.
I look forward to it. I think your board is really funny right now.
I know. Well, we got there for a reason.
We absolutely did. I'm going to turn the stream off of Facebook.